So several weeks ago, and several videos ago, I had explored the Fly Creek Cider Mill and Orchard in and around Cooperstown, New York. And while I was there, I obtained this pumpkin bread and muffin mix that I have been kind of waiting for the right time to make. And I'm really excited. It kind of feels like now is the time. So I've never made pumpkin bread before, but I have made banana bread. I've never made any kind of bread through a sort of pre-packaged mix, so that's going to be interesting as well. But it was such a beautiful store, and it had such amazing fresh items, and I had also gotten this corn salsa that was absolutely delicious, and I consumed the whole thing in a matter of a couple days. I could have eaten it just with a spoon, it was so good. And so there were a couple other things, including some really interesting crackers and just miscellaneous items that were really interesting and unique. So it was a really fun store to explore, and I'm very excited at the thought of revisiting, which hopefully will be in the near future. But for now, I felt like whipping up some pumpkin bread and enjoying that deliciousness. And so in honor of the pumpkin bread, I was almost going to say pumpkin pie, which is also delicious and I've never made, but in honor of the sort of season, the fall, fast approaching Halloween season, if not, it's already commenced, but to baking. Okay, so we're going for pumpkin bread, which is the exact same directions as if we were making muffins, with the exception of using a loaf pan. So we're gonna bake it at 375 for 55 minutes. I've got my eggs, I've got my vegetable oil, I've got my canned pumpkin, and I've got the mix. Last but not least, we've got the pumpkin bread and muffin mix. Oh, it smells really good. Wow. It smells heavily like cinnamon. Yum! Now, if I can just open the bag. There we go. Nothing a little scissor can't work through. Okay. So here's the contents of the bag. Nothing like a flour bath. Let's see if this says what's in this bag. Cane sugar, bleached cake wheat flour, enriched wheat flour, baking soda, monocalcium phosphate, calcium acid prophosphate, cinnamon, sea salt, and natural spices. This product is manufactured in a facility that also processes dairy, egg, and soy. Well, it smells damn good. Just gonna mix on. Mix and mix and mix and mix. But did you mix it? Did you mix it well? This is probably, I would say, maybe my 5th time baking a bread on my own. So, not sure how it looks, but it smells so good. I cannot get over how good this smells. I just got a whiff of wow, words. Orange. I had an orange for breakfast this morning, so I'm smelling the peel from the garbage. But I kind of feel like somehow it does well with the smell of this, so who knows, maybe some orange glaze would be really good on something like this. Lumps. Little lickety lumps. Loopity doops. I'm so excited to try this. Wow. I was gonna bring this to my parents' house, and now I'm kind of reconsidering. I'm just kidding. Okay, so I've got my pan. I'm about to get my butter. Alright. I'm all buttered up. I'm buttered up, baby. And there we have it. Oh, globbing it all over. I'm sliding it all over the place because the way that I'm filming this is probably not necessarily what I would consider to be perhaps ideal. The way that I have the camera currently stationed and the way that I have the flip out viewer is showing what I'm recording upside down. So not only am I not used to recording myself baking, well, I guess I should say not only am I not used to really baking, I'm not really used to myself recording myself baking, and I'm certainly not really familiar with recording myself baking and viewing the recording while it's filming upside down. So all the learning process, but I'm very excited. This baby is going in the oven. I will see it again in 55 minutes. The timer is set. I wanted to also highlight these molasses crinkles cookies from Fly Creek. They were absolutely delicious. I have one left, and although it's been a couple weeks and the cookie has gotten a bit stale, it still retains its delicious flavor and is 100% still edible, so I just wanted to quickly mention that one as well. Got a nice sugar coating. I think this came with probably about 10 cookies, I want to say, give or take. So I've been eating them very slowly since I had them. I don't eat a lot with sugar, this much sugar anyway. I don't tend to eat a lot of sweets unless the occasion calls for it, or I'm just really in the mood. So I've been kind of slowly making my way through these cookies, but they are really quite delicious. Timer has gone off. Okay, here we go for the big reveal. I'm so excited. Ooh. La la la. Yummy, yummy. Gonna be in my tummy.
0, 1 abstention. If you weren't at the meeting, you weren't there either.
It's been a minute since we talked about this project. Surprisingly so, I think we were last here in November of 23. But actually, it really speaks to some of the challenges of this project, which we are huge believers in and very excited about.
Okay, so I'm about to come upon 1818 Fifth Ave, where there is a proposed project to demolish the remnants of a bank and develop a new residential apartment complex, an apartment building. So it sits right next to this church here. Take a look more at the street from the opposite end, from the opposite side. But here's where the bank is. It's currently sitting as just a vacant building. So we've got this really beautiful old house right across the street from the bank where Uncle Sam stands. And they've got a little plaque with some history of the building that I think is really interesting. But the building goes all the way back to, I believe, what used to be a carriage house. I don't recall if the property is subdivided, if it's 2 parcels or just 1, but I know that there was another project proposed to sort of cordon off this section here to be exclusively private and to have this in the back sort of a separate plot. I don't know where that currently stands, but let's take a look at that plaque. That urn is magnificent. Wow. So beautiful. So it's a little challenging to see the entirety of the plaque with this lovely plant. So I think I'm just going to record this particular shot and read over the screen. So I'll read it separately and then dub it over. History of 1819 Fifth Avenue. In 1797, the premises on the western side of 5th Street in the city of Troy, initially known as Lot 418, was originally owned by Jacob D. Vanderheyden. Between the years of 1797 and 1862, the property was occupied by many different individuals. Some of the more colorful people were John Quigley, John McCann, Charles B. Prescott, Ebenezer Prescott, Blandina Dudley, Ebenezer Wiswald, and Daniel White. In 1862, on the afternoon of May 10th, Lot 418 was engulfed in the Great Fire of Troy when sparks from a locomotive ignited a wooden bridge at the foot of Federal Street. Aided by a gusty wind, the flames spread over a large portion of downtown Troy, destroying all the structures that had previously stood in the area. Within days, property changed hands and rebuilding began. The house, with its ornate trim, the large carriage house, and courtyard, form an important urban complex. Across the street were lots 1818 through 1834, which was the site of the well-known brownstones that created Doctors' Row. They were demolished in 1967 to provide land for a proposed medical center, which was never built. In 1878, Edward Murphy, Jr., mayor of Troy from 1875 through 1883 and U.S. Senator from 1893 through 1899, purchased this house from Joseph Wilkinson, built shortly after the fire, and resided here until his death in 1911. His wife Julia lived here until her death in 1915, and their children until 1921. Edward Murphy was also an astute businessman who owned the Troy Daily Press, Troy Gas Company, Troy Real Estate, and was a partner of Kennedy Murphy Brewing and Malt Company with William Kennedy, located at the corner of Ferry Street and 6th, the site of the former Ahern Apartments. In 1921, the Burns family took possession and moved J. W. Burns' son's Fifth Avenue Funeral Chapel here. Cornelius Connie F. Burns was the son of John J. and Ellen Gorman Burns. Following his father's death in 1881, he worked with brothers John, David, and James in the undertaking business started in 1835 by their grandfather, John Burns, an Irish immigrant. John and David died less than 2 years after their father's death in 1883, and Connie continued the family business with his brother James. Connie, Troy's most colorful and personable mayor, was first elected to 4 terms in 1911 and returned to the family business in 1920. But re-entered local politics again in 1927 to serve another 4 terms. Connie will be remembered for his intense devotion to Troy, where he coined the slogan, "Troy for all and all for Troy." His sister, Nellie Burns, the youngest of 5 children, lived here until her death in 1960. John J. Tower operated the funeral chapel for the Burns family while Connie was ill and after he passed away in 1938. In 1960, John J. and Estelle Tower purchased 1819 Fifth Ave and continued operating J. W. Burns' son's funeral chapel with the help of his son, John A. Tony Tower, who began his career in 1961. After John J. passed away in 1966, his son Tony continued operating as John A. Tower Funeral Chapel until he retired the business in 1978. In 1978, Edward O'Hare, who married John J. and Estelle Tower's daughter, Estelle Sheik, and John E. Ryan purchased this brownstone as the home of their business, Ryan and O'Hare Insurance Agency. In 2002, Stephen and Susan Bouchy purchased what is considered one of the most elegant brownstones in Troy. Stephen then relocated both of his firms, Bouchy Financial Group and Bouchy & Clark Benefits, to historic downtown Troy. Since 1878, this distinguished brownstone has been owned by only 4 families, which is why it is still so well preserved. Okay, so here's a bit of a closer view. You can see what's sort of behind it. It's a decent plot, decent size. So there's the house. I believe these are all residential units, with the exception perhaps of one of these spots here. I don't actually know where the plot begins and ends, but I would imagine that it's somewhere around here, right to those barriers back there. Similarly, I don't think those cars parked there are part of the property, but it's basically all this right here. As far as I remember, I don't believe the residents across the street were thrilled about the idea of this building going up, but perhaps that's not fully accurate. Got another Uncle Sam.
So what's happened in that period since we last presented? Well, our costs on the project have gone up about $4.5 million. Our initial estimates were really based on a project that finished this year. So those were sort of, as I said, some prices went up 20, 30%, some went up as much as 200%. And it was really important that we did our diligence to make sure that we did in fact still have a project that worked financially. And by no means is this project a financial home run, but frankly, I'll get into it. It really aligns very much with our values as a developer and with the kind of projects that we want to do. Rosenblum Development is about 45 years young. We are a developer and property manager. We're fully integrated, and typically we'll say that we're a property manager who also develops real estate. We really are longtime owner-operators. We typically build to own and operate our properties. That's true of the News Apartments, our first project in Troy, as well as Vicina here in Troy, both multifamily properties that we're very proud of.
I just want to show really quickly on Google Maps that this is the bank right here that I've shown some more recent footage of. And the Troy News Apartments are right down the street. This building right here on the corner, it's a bit unclear whether there are Rosenblum Development Apartments as part of this corner building here, or whether the apartments are more in this aspect of the building, which appears newer, appears as a newer construction. And I believe where the entrance is to the apartments, although that may be inaccurate. But this development here seems to be the predominant development constructed by Rosenblum, and it's clear that they intended to make the facade look somewhat similar to this older building where the record used to be housed, and that's why it's relatively unclear. I do see that there is what looks to be some connectivity here, but this also might be an apartment. It might be a common space. It definitely has a bit more of a modern appearance, even with the brick. I mean, it is an interesting juxtaposition between older buildings and sort of newer, more modern constructions that incorporate both a sort of more modernized materials as well as at least the intentionality of matching the facade and character of the surrounding neighborhood. But that kind of seems to be their sort of quote-unquote design MO. It's very possible that a building constructed on the property where the current bank is at 1818 will look something similar like this. It's very possible. So we're starting here on 4th Street and Ferry Street cross section, looking north. So if we travel a bit north, here is the beginning of the Vicina building. So this is the other development of Rosenblum that is being referenced in this IDA meeting. So we can see in the surrounding neighborhood there are a good amount of older buildings still remaining. You can tell by just the ornateness of the facade in the architecture. And you can even see here there's an old painted sign. It looks like it says gold dust or gold DUS something. It definitely still has a bit of a historic vibe. Got some more apartments here. I mean, I believe that these are all apartments on the 2nd and 3rd and above floors, with the ground layer being business, commercial space. But, I mean, it definitely seems like a bit of a contrast. It looks like it's the same materials, a bit of an addition of brick to match somewhat the surrounding neighborhood. At least visually, the sort of dominant materials that are coming through here are the more modern. As we continue on down, I mean, it's a very big construction. I don't know how many units this building houses, but coming around the corner, there are more older buildings, inclusive of this corner building. I don't know the age of them, but they just look probably, if not 1800s, early 1900s. So here we've got the corner, here we've got Vicina. Perhaps this is the main entrance here on this corner. I mean, there are some interesting architectural design elements. But it does look very similar to the news apartments units. So it does seem like there is a sort of quote-unquote standard design implemented by Rosenblum. That's not to say that it's good or bad, right or wrong. It just, from observation, seems very similar.
One of the things, and we'll talk about that more as it relates to this particular project at 1818 Fifth Avenue, performance is really about the building design. We're very focused on sustainable construction. Our first all-electric multifamily building is now up and operating in downtown Albany. Our company's made a major investment in solar. We have about 2.5 megawatts of solar installed on our rooftops across our portfolio, including here in Troy. We're always trying to sort of increase and challenge ourselves to do better, and that means not just looking at the performance of the building and how much how carbon intensive our projects are, but also looking at embodied carbon, the materials that we use in our projects, and sort of what the carbon footprint of that is. Practice is very much about how we bring our tenants and our residents into a more sustainable lifestyle. So, and it'll be true of this project as well as our other residential projects. That's everything from really comprehensive indoor bicycle storage and repair, kind of encouraging the use of bicycles, fully discrete trash and recycling. So we actually, in all of our buildings, do 2 separate compactors, 2 separate chutes. So it's much easier for folks to participate in single stream recycling. It also reduces the amount of waste that comes from our buildings to landfills. So less intensity on city resources. And we provide free universal access passes for CDTA services to all of our residents. Last, and this is a really critical one, place or placemaking. We really focus on developing projects where we can upcycle underdeveloped properties. This is a very good example, as you'll see, where we've got a sort of abandoned and I would say inappropriate structure for a downtown, a suburban style drive-through, bank branch with multiple curb cuts, not great for pedestrian safety, and replace those with projects that are respective of the context in which we're constructing historically and otherwise, and are appropriately scaled, massed, sized. We really look at the spirit of the project as well. How will we be contributive to the neighborhood? What things can we bring into the neighborhood? And in this case, oftentimes that's retail. We look at retail not as a building, not as a source of revenue, but really as a building amenity and also as a community amenity. So we're very selective about the type of retail that we'll put in our mixed-use buildings. In this case, and I'll talk more about it, we've actually decided not to put any retail in this building because we think that will be more contributive to the existing retail in downtown Troy. Just a bird's eye view of where the site is located. 71 units, a 4-story building. Again, zoning allowed us to build to 5 stories. However, we didn't feel that was appropriate for the neighborhood. We wanted to keep the heights complementary to, in particular, the brownstones that are directly across the street. And actually one of the things you'll see is we want to make sure that the interface at the street level is complementary to that historic, those historic buildings across the street. So we've incorporated ground floor units that actually have stoops, very much like the buildings on the other side of the street, create that neighborhood and community engagement as well as that visual complementary appeal. We always do a lot of research as we're doing design to get a sense of what the neighborhood looked like before. And this is sort of the design. We are fully through site planning approval. This project is now fully entitled. And you can kind of see it's always a difficult balance, not to go too far down the rabbit hole in terms of design approach, but what you want to do is find something that's appropriate, that reflects the character and the quality of the existing housing stock without cheapening it by doing sort of a Disney version of it. So what we've done is really keyed into the colors, into the style. You see the bay windows. We've kind of reduced the mass a little bit visually by doing that connector, what we call that gasket over the lobby. So very well received design. But one of the other things that's really exciting about it is it produces what we call beneficial byproducts. So because we're making the building absolutely airtight to achieve our energy model, we have to introduce energy recovery ventilation. And in doing so, we're continuously bringing filtered fresh air into each apartment unit and pulling out stale air. So these buildings are healthier and they're also quieter because of the amount of insulation and the tightness of the envelope. So really helps with the tenant experience as well as significantly lowering our profile and lowering our energy demand. This building was also the winner of NYSERDA's Building of Excellence the last round, so we're very proud of that. It's a keystone project. The Buildings of Excellence is usually given to kind of 8 to 10 projects in each round. I think they're on round 4 or 5 now, so not many projects get this. I think most developers are finding themselves in an untenable position of, in order to make the numbers even work, you're really delivering projects that are at the very highest rental, the very highest rents that a project can command in the market. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we're providing subsidized housing, which is, a different capital stack, requires different income qualifications. But for many in the middle, like our young professionals, like 50s, or like seniors who are over 50, which is the largest population cohort in the United States, housing has become increasingly unattainable because you don't qualify for subsidized housing, but you can't really access what I would call luxury market rents. So right from the inception of this project, we were trying to look at a way that we could offer a more price accessible market rate product. So that's what we've arrived at in kind of increasing the density of the building with more units. We're able to provide a rather unusual product, but obviously a product that's in high demand. The economic impact of this project alone, we're effectively talking about 71 net new households to Troy. The spending power of those individuals, mostly single occupancies, amounts to, according to an economic impact study that we did with Camoin, about $2.34 million in annual spend in downtown Troy alone. 21 new jobs. Those jobs generating close to $1 million in additional income. So it's a significant impact on top of obviously the direct investment that we're making with the project through construction jobs and et cetera. And of course the 21 new jobs includes jobs in our property. The outsized impact of this, we're continuously hearing from our employers, we do not have enough housing to meet the demand of our hiring. So housing has become a block to getting enough, particularly young, qualified employees. So, and it's very interesting if you look at, there was the 2022 Capital Region Economic Development Survey. It was a workforce survey, and they looked at sort of 16 high growth occupations. These are occupations that are directly linked to the Capital Region's target industries. So wind, here in downtown Troy, digital, IT, gaming, electronics. This is the hub of that, what they call next tech core. Pharmaceuticals at Regeneron, just sort of effectively up the street. And then you look at the average rent in the Capital Region, which is now north of $1,500. More than half of those target occupations at the starting salaries would be rent burdened to severely rent burdened. At our average, a massive issue for ourselves in the capital region, and and to that end, why I say housing really is economic development. At the end of the day, that is what this project is very much trying to address. Is not only to model a more sustainable building, but also to model this sort of more middle income approach and make this offering to see if we can start to mitigate or offer high quality housing options in our downtown at a more price accessible rent. We are not in the historic district, but we are adjacent to the historic district, and obviously we were very attuned to that, working with the State Historic Preservation Office to make sure that the project that we were delivering would be sensitive to that. But that increases the costs of materials, it increases the cost of detailing on the building to deliver that product. I think we've gone through probably the major boom cycle in terms of runaway inflation, but we continue to see prices mount, and actually supply challenges are ongoing. Labor challenges, we have a shortage of labor, and what we've done is we've gone and made this harder on ourselves, because we're building buildings that a lot of even though we have wonderful contractor community here in the capital region, they're not used to building a building like this. The level of detailing, the fussiness of the air sealing, we have to pass blower door tests, we have to make sure that it's absolutely airtight, requires us to do a lot of additional training. We're typically doing modeling of different systems with our contractors, showing them how pieces and assemblies need to go together. Both adds time, it adds challenge to the project.
Happy autumn equinox. Woohoo! I'm on my way to the first planning board meeting, and I thought I'd give a shout out to Emma Willard. What's up?
Peter Kehoe.
Here.
Jim Schufelt. Here. Jennifer York. Here. Jim Scully.
Here.
And Tony Dickinson.
Here.
And with that, I would like to make a motion for the election of Peter Kehoe to chairman of the Troy Planning Board. Yeah, so all in favor of that vote? Aye. And before us this evening, we have some old business. 200 Broadway.
With me is Kelsey Carr, our project engineer from La Bella, and Amber Matthias from the Property Owner LLC.
Here we've got 200 Broadway. Looking to redevelop the existing office space into more residential units on the top floors. If I remember correctly, it's the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors, but I actually am not quite sure, but it might be spanning all of this upper complex here.
.200 Broadway, the Henrik Hudson building. Most people are familiar with it. It's pretty historic. It's on Broadway between 2nd and Franklin. We've owned it for a number of years, and we are seeking to convert the top 3 floors from its current use as office, well, vacant office, into apartments. Floors 2 through 4 are currently apartments, 9 units each per floor, and we are hoping to mirror that on the 5th through 7th floor. Exactly what exists below it, 9 units, 27 units total, 36 beds total on floors 5 through 7. And it had been difficult for us over an extended period of time to try and find office tenant, but we know there's a demand for residential.
From an engineering standpoint, and took no exception to what's being proposed. They did provide all the necessary information that we have requested, and at this time we are recommending the board consider this for approval.
Anyone, questions?
Has the project been reviewed by our fire department?
Yes. Overall, the project appears to be a good fit for the area and aligns with the city's goals for downtown revitalization. Approving this change of use could enhance the vibrancy and economic potential of the downtown area. For me, it's a yes.
Could I just ask, is this motion contingent on the staff recommendation that Knox box be divided?
Yes.
And you're okay with that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion?
Nothing for me, it's fine.
Call the roll then? Or we can just.
Yeah, you guys can just say, once the motion's called, you know, you can kind of go down the lines. You know. Jim?
Aye.
Tony? Jim?
Aye.
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 206 First Street. Anyone here representing the applicant?
My name is Joe Pernicero. I'm here on behalf of Sequence Development. With me is folks from ColorWorks, a local nonprofit. I'd like to introduce yourselves.
My name is Ken Ragsdale. I'm the president of the board of directors of ColorWorks.
Elizabeth Seven, executive director.
Okay, so our project is the redevelopment of 206 First Street.
An old garage.
Into a art gallery and studio space for a permanent home for ColorWorks. We are seeking a conditional use permit as well as site plan approval.
ColorWorks is a nationally recognized arts nonprofit dedicated to supporting emerging and underrepresented artists, creating challenging and culturally relevant contemporary artworks. Our goal is to expand the current arts ecosystem in upstate New York, and we provide a serious venue for engagement and dialogue across all disciplines, featuring innovative artworks by local, national, and international artists. We launched here in Troy in 2009 as an arts collective and grew into a nonprofit arts organization in 2015, but never had a permanent home to call our own. And so this is an opportunity for us to own this property and house all of our programming under one roof.
So our project is 206 First Street. It was built as a foundry building. It was most recently a auto body shop. It is now currently vacant. We will utilize historic tax credits to redevelop the building. As you can see, it is a concrete parking lot, some of which is in poor condition, especially at the curb entrance. Most of it will just need minor repairs. We'd like to maintain the concrete. There's some green space in the back right corner. We will be extending that along the southern edge of the property as well as towards the front to meet our green space requirement. Currently there is minimal lighting, except for the street lighting and some building mounted lights. We're going to propose adding 1 or 2 extra lights on the lot to help with safety. You'll see 2 asphalt patches in front of the building on the sidewalk. We will tear those up and put in green space to improve curb appeal. And currently you've got a barbed wire fence in front of the lot. We'll take that down and take direction from the board or staff on what type of fence you'd like to see. We are going to replace the now boarded up with concrete garage doors with beautiful glass garage doors to get light into the space. Like I said, the building was built as a foundry in South Troy. It was a very industrial building, and new windows all across. believe a fresh coat of paint. We're still discussing that.
My thought is, let's make a site visit next week.
Sure.
And I thought it might be a good idea from the standpoint of runoff, because you get a lot of runoff from the roof. You're going to be providing some green space around the perimeter of the parking area. So I thought it would be a good idea if we could take advantage of that and have, shall I say, a number 2 wash stone as part of the surface treatment where some of the runoff will be discharged to there, or a grass area to absorb some of the runoff. And we'll look at that together, see what makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge asset. What you're proposing is a huge asset to the neighborhood. And so we'll make a site visit together.
Yes.
We'll look at what makes sense curbing wise, what makes sense, shall I say, perimeter green space, how wide that should be, what your needs for parking. And I think that would be, that could be incorporated very nicely into your revised site plan.
I have a question about the alley. Are you going to have access from the alley or exit into the alley, or is it just going to be on First Street?
Currently, there's not a gate or access, but we would be open to considering that. We have considered, the option of the potential of closing down the alley if there's interest in having neighborhood block parties or, cultural festivals or things like that that are coordinated. There could be potential there, so it's something to discuss.
Is it a one-way street? Is it a one-way alley going north or going south, or is it 2 ways?
I believe it's 2-way.
How many people do you believe the room will fit, the gallery itself?
Well, it's about a 4,000 square foot space, the gallery itself, but it's a very open concept with a very open flow throughout the entire 10,000 square feet space. So I would welcome the fire department to come in and consult with us. But given the history of our programming, I can't foresee an event over 150 people.
So I just want to give like a little bit of an assist to the board here. This is for a special use permit, right? So through Chapter 285, Section 16E, special review permit criteria. Either one, or the other applicant or board members, you could kind of go down this list of criteria and ask them to, state some of their input on each one of the subjects, either this meeting or the next meeting. But in either way, the applicant should be prepared to address those details. It might be just good to have on the record, though, as the finding of fact sheet is going to be determined based on the narrative of those questions.
And the narrative will be tonight or provided?
So either if you wanted to run down them tonight, or if you wanted to run down them the next meeting for their hearing.
I think it depends on whether the applicant's prepared tonight or not.
Right.
Would you rather wait until the next
So
meeting?
I've dealt with that process before. I'm happy to answer them tonight. We can also provide in writing shortly after this meeting, but we are certainly prepared to answer those questions tonight.
So no approval may be given tonight, as the only actions that could be handled tonight would be the declaration of the application's completeness,
Right.
and if so, the scheduling of a hearing for the following opportunity.
And can it be declared complete without answers to all of the staff recommendations?
The components of the application, yes, you could assess that they're all there and not have the rundown of the question for the special use permit. It's just something that you want to do before you make any action to approve or deny.
On the staff recommendations, were to provide a more detailed site plan, clarify drive entrance, provide details on sidewalks and curb. Is that what you did? So this is
Correct. They presented an updated survey with some of the features that we would look for in the site plan. But we'd like some degree of clarification, some additional measurements, and some kind of exact components of the site plan and how they're going to lay out.
Correct. So we expect to submit a revised site plan that addresses all these staff recommendations within the next week.
All right, so is there any need for us to go over them? You looked at them and you're okay with addressing all of those? Is there anything there you would object to?
Nope, we reviewed all of them. We have no objections. The only clarification I needed was with the city engineer regarding curbing and the downspouts on the drains, which I think we'll meet next week and address those. But other than that, all of these are easily doable.
All right, so then we could entertain a motion that the application is complete
You
this
could.
time, and then we'll set a date for a hearing.
That's correct.
Is that correct? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. So the next motion would be to set a date for hearing.
280 Chapter 285, Section 16E, special use permit review criteria. The first item of 8 is that the proposal, that the consistency and compatibility of the proposed use with the purposes of this chapter and the requirements of the use district and development intensity zone in which it is located. So based upon its development intensity zone and its use district, is this use commensurate with those details? If you're not prepared to know those types of locations, use districts, because we're still getting our feet wet, then I would say let's make sure that the applicant's aware of this section of the code and provide that he's going to answer all of these on the record and potentially with a document in writing as well in preparation for the November hearing. It might be better that way. But just to give a couple of examples of what we're going to be looking for. The consistency and compatibility of the proposed use with the goals and recommendations of the City of Troy Comprehensive Plan, Complete Streets Ordinance, and other approved city plans and programs. The impact on the nature and character of the surrounding neighborhood, natural environment, historic district, or corridor in which it is located. The impact on the site and its surroundings, considering environmental, social, and economic impacts of traffic, noise, dust, odors, release of harmful substances, solid waste disposal, glare, or any other nuisances. Restrictions or conditions on design of structures or operation of the use, including hours of operation, necessary to ensure compatibility with the surrounding uses or to protect the natural resources of the city. The adequacy and accessibility of essential public facilities and services such as streets, parking spaces, police and fire protection, drainage structures, refuse disposal, water and sewer, and schools. The impact of the proposed use on traffic congestion, impairment of pedestrian safety, or overload of existing streets considering their current width, surfacing, and condition, and any improvement proposed to be made by the applicant. And last, the compatibility of the proposed use with the city's historic preservation guidelines and the impact on adjacent historic resources as formally recognized by the city's historic districts and the New York State and federal registers of historic places.
So you should give a sense to the board of if there are variations over time, what that would look like. And also help the board understand what is in the immediate area, the immediate neighborhood, how this will benefit or not the other businesses in the area, and how it'll fit in with the comprehensive plans.
So I'm the owner of the lot directly south of the lot in question.
Could you state your name, please?
My name is Antonia Santiago.
Thank you.
And I own the lot in conjunction with my husband, Martin LaFarmer. Okay. I think there might be a need of some kind of communication because in terms of property lines and that kind of thing, because I'm not really certain of, I think, a portion of that 3-layered fence.
Could you address the board because we cannot hear you?
Sorry, so the fence is made of 3 layers, and I think a portion of the layering is on our property line.
Need to be from the.
We can share.
So happy to meet you.
Okay, yes.
We just closed on this property.
I didn't say that. I'm absolutely.
I believe in open communication, and we have a site survey that was done, and I think we should just meet and sit down and talk it all through so that we're in open communication about it all.
Is there any intention of residential occupancy of that space? Okay.
There is not. The applicants indicated there is not.
I see. Okay. I'm a little bit concerned that the outdoor lighting would present a nuisance to my immediate structure and my family.
Having a family myself, I'm sensitive to that. And we've been really thoughtful in sort of our conceptualization of that outdoor space, and have spoken to quite a few people who we've met in the neighborhood about what they would like to see in that space. We'd actually like to see it not used as parking, as much as it could be possibly a gathering space, like thinking of more of a kind of urban park. Lighting, as minimal lighting as possible, is sort of the goal. Not heavy noise is in the plans to be sensitive to the neighborhood, but a space that people can truly come together and experience art and life and just spend time. There's not many places in that immediate neighborhood to gather, and I've taken every opportunity to stop and introduce myself and meet them and just talk about what it's like living in the neighborhood and what they'd like to see. And many people have said we need more space to just spend time. And so that's what we missed you, I know, but it's really nice to meet you tonight. And I look forward to getting to know you.
212 4th Street. Anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening. Chris Schrader, representing I am the applicant owner as well as engineer of record. I also retain TAP Architects as the architect of record. And then in addition to renovation of the building, there's also a small green space that we're going to restore as well. As it's outlined here on the site plan, it's showing a single-story masonry and wood frame mixed use, which we will be building new construction second story above. So relatively, straightforward development plan. It's a small parcel, only 700 square feet of building with another several hundred square feet of green space.
I have a couple of questions. I did drive by it, and your green space, I know you want to do some kind of small events. Do you think that space is small enough where some of these events, some of the people would be coming outside to enjoy the outside?
That's what we're anticipating and looking into right now.
So is that why you're taking the tree down?
Yeah.
I love that tree.
I know, I'm torn on that tree because I'm enamored by it, but it's also much too large for that small space currently.
Yeah. I noticed on your plans that you might be doing planters around the space. I think a couple of benches would be nice in there also.
Concerned at all about the fact that I believe CDTA is building, I don't know what they're calling it, a bus center or
the mobility hub?
Yeah, I think it's literally across the street from you. I suspect that's going to create a lot of people, traffic. Maybe those folks might think that your area, your green space is a place for them to kind of congregate also.
Entirely possible. Not necessarily concerned about it. I certainly welcome the CDTA redevelopment. That's why we worked with them to put the signage on our property, in addition to moving their e-bike or their bikes to that location as well from a temporary basis. But really at the end of the day, the idea is to create a third space with the first floor, that's open up to the community and help out, small businesses that want to do pop-up events, things of that nature. So the idea is it actually works out really well to be directly adjacent to that.
Maybe one more. Is your second floor going to be taller than the building behind you, or is that?
It will be taller than the building behind it. Yep.
And with regard to the units, micro units, these are going to be 300 square feet?
Correct. Yeah.
Small
studios, exactly. Yep.
So the actions tonight would be essentially the same as the last. Motion as to whether or not you believe the application is complete or not, and if you think so, then to schedule a hearing.
Again in November?
It would be November. Only after the application's been declared complete can you open the floor for public comment.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Made it to 212 4th Street. Another sort of community, perhaps event space. Looks like it's already under construction here. Looks like the garage is already being stripped. I believe the parcel is this building here, plus this green space, with the proposal adding another floor, which might be a bit higher in elevation than this neighboring building here. I don't know by how much though. So we've got this Reimagine Liberty Square poster, billboard, currently sponsored by CDTA, presenting the imagined landscape here. So a new bus stop under construction. I'm not quite sure if it's completed, but it's been under construction for a couple weeks, if not months. I don't know how old this structure is, but it almost looks like a cast iron beam. So cool. The rivets have quite an ornate design. I just spoke to a really nice older gentleman who's lived in Troy his entire life, now in his 70s, and he was telling me that this property used to be a gas station, I suppose before it was a garage, or perhaps it was still the gas station that owned the garage, but it used to be a gas station, and I suppose was around in the 70s, 60s, 70s, when there was a sort of gas moratorium, and on certain days of the week was when you were permitted to get gas. So that was quite interesting to learn a little bit more history about this building here. But just a quick shot of the surrounding neighborhood here. Got another angle of the building here. This beautiful tree, which under the proposal will be removed, which sits across from what is currently a vacant marketplace square. There have been many proposals over the years of new constructions for this particular lot. There might be, I believe there's one in the works now, but I'm not quite sure. I don't quite remember offhand what the status is on that project. So this spot here used to be connected to the Troy Gas Company. This plot used to be full of the buildings that processed, I don't remember exactly what material it is, but they processed certain material to make it into gas, which was then funneled to the gas holder building several blocks away that I briefly showcased in connection to, oh gosh, what's that gentleman's name? Not Furley. I believe he was the first mayor that I showed in connection with the 1819 property. Yeah, there used to be some pretty interesting processing going on in this particular area, lighting the whole, I believe, of Troy, lighting it up. I've just attended the planning board meeting, and there are a couple of things that sort of immediately stood out to me as I was experiencing the energy and the presence. And so I thought I would just kind of more briefly mention them here in the sort of wake, if you will, of the meeting. And also because my phone storage is very close to full, so I want to try and make this as quick as possible. The first thing that stood out to me was when Eric was reading through the enumeration of the specific code for the applications to move forward, as he was reading through, I felt such an overwhelming, intense sense of overwhelm. And I cannot say with any degree of certainty whether that feeling went sort of beyond the sense of the experience I was having. And I do not want to project any of that energy and experience onto any of the board members or any of the other participants any of the other attendants in the room. Although it was very interesting to me how few people in attendance there were. I suppose to some degree I was expecting there to be more, but the predominant amount of people who were in the room were actually applicants. And so I don't want to say with any degree of certainty that the board members themselves were feeling this same energy, were aware of it, had any thoughts of that nature. It was just a sense that I felt at that time and was something that I immediately took note of within myself. So that was quite interesting. And I do want to acknowledge that this was the first board meeting, so there is a great learning curve that comes, I'm sure, for those in attendance, although Peter did have the experience with the administration of Tutungian, where he was the chairman of the board for, I believe, 8 years, if I'm remembering correctly. So he does have some experience. Another thing that really stood out to me was it was interesting how both Dana and Russ were in attendance and sitting with the board members. So Dana being the city council and Russ being the city engineer. And for a good majority of the beginning, their presence, and really throughout the meeting, their presence kind of felt like it sort of dominated to a degree that it felt almost as though they were members of the board. And I know that there's language in the code creating the board specifically addressing the presence and the recommendation, the support of the city council. I'm not quite sure about the city engineer, but that was another thing that really stood out to me, was how much it felt like they were actually a part of the board, even though there were only 5 members appointed. And I feel like there was another thing that stood out to me, and maybe it was the quantity of people in attendance. But overall, it was relatively quick. It kind of felt like the board was putting a lot more authority, if you will, into the hands of the applicants in the sense of, does this feel good to you? Do you feel like you've answered the questions? Do you feel like it's appropriate to what is sort of required of you? And I'm sort of putting words in their mouth, but that was the sense that I got. And so it just kind of felt like the board was very quickly kind of moving through the applications without really asking a lot of questions. But again, I realize that this is the first meeting and they may not be as familiar with the code and with the proceedings as a commission who had been in operation for several years. And so it'll be interesting to see how it continues. There were a couple interesting projects proposed, but it did seem relatively easygoing, if you will. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm not saying that's good or bad, none of that. Just that's the sense that I got. And so it'll be interesting to see how the board continues to address applications moving forward. And yeah, so that's kind of a sort of as brief as I can make it, which is a challenge for me, expression of what's currently being felt in the experience. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so there's an interesting email that came through this morning. It's this email feeding curiosity, and the subject line of the email is most canned pumpkin isn't actually pumpkin. I just edited the pumpkin bread filming footage, and so when I saw this email come through, I kind of laughed a bit and thought it might be a little funny to read this article and see what they say about this canned pumpkin. And I actually had a thought at the time that I was making the pumpkin bread about that canned pumpkin. I don't know if the thought was specifically, is this really pumpkin, but I did kind of question what the substance of it really was. I didn't look at the ingredients of it. I just kind of, to a degree, assumed that it was pumpkin, so I'm not really sure what I ate. Okay, so here's the article. Those donuts look yummy. And sort of nuclear. Turns out the word dessert, meaning to clear the table after a meal, didn't even hit the modern lexicon until the 17th century. A time when French nobles feasted on a post-dinner selection of preserves, jams, and cookies, calling the course le fruit? Interesting. Renaming the serving of sweets gained popularity as chefs crafted painstakingly designed sugar sculptures, cakes, and treats, though the term wouldn't take off until the French Revolution, when commoners more easily gained access to sugar. While apple pie may have misappropriated origins, the first recipe appeared in England around 1381, not the US. Pumpkin pie deserves more credit as a purely American dessert. The spiced autumnal pie that now inspires countless fall desserts and drinks was concocted by early English colonists who encountered native pumpkins for the first time. Commercial purees actually consist of a sweeter, butternut-like squash.
I swear all the ads are such a pain in the ass.
The coffee drink that makes you feel like you're eating liquid pumpkin pie is in fact squash spice latte. Libby's Pure Pumpkin, the quintessential American canned pumpkin brand, is responsible for 85% of canned pumpkins sold in the world. Libby's grows a proprietary strain of tan-skinned Dickinson squash. And although Libby's does refer to its fruit as pumpkin, in appearance, taste, and texture, not to mention species, it closely resembles squash. It more closely resembles squash. In fact, its closest high-profile relative is butternut squash. Because the FDA finds that drawing a hard line designation between pumpkins and golden-fleshed winter squash is murky, it's perfectly legal for Libby's and other canned pumpkin brands to label their products as such. And because many of these companies do offer a product that is denser, sweeter, and more flavorful than the more commonly available pumpkin would be, can we really begrudge them the semantics? The justice system, as the authority, the judge, if you will, is the sort of representative authority who makes judgment on one's experiences, if you will, for lack of a better phrase. And that sort of quote-unquote externalized source of authority is judging someone's character, perhaps, and behavior and actions and intentions, juxtaposed with the ancient Egyptian culture, it just almost feels a little bit more like in that culture there is this sort of projected idea of the perception of a higher authority that quote unquote judges the heart of another. Is it as light as a feather? Looking into the heart of the individual to assess the sort of quote unquote appropriate judgment. I don't know, there's just something about it that kind of feels like we've kind of taken the heart out of the justice system here. It just seems like the heart almost becomes irrelevant. And it's just kind of interesting to juxtapose the two cultures and how this perception of the carrying out of justice is applied and experienced, especially where there is this representation in both cultures of this sort of scales, the scales of justice. It's just interesting how the same symbol is used, and it comes into play when there is this association with judgment and authority, an authority figure sort of making a judgment for that person who they are making a judgment about to pass and move forward in a certain direction. Yesterday, as I was editing the footage of the IDA meeting, I felt this overwhelming consumption of myself, falling into this opening rabbit hole that swallowed me whole. And I fell deeper and deeper and deeper. This rabbit hole had to do with the 1818 Fifth Ave property. And for some reason, as I was editing the footage that I had taken of 1818 and of the IDA meeting discussing it, I felt such an overwhelming gravitation to explore the history of this proposed development. And I was aware of this project's development from several months ago when it first came into my conscious awareness. But I started looking back further into its introduction as well, and there have been a bunch of meetings both in the city council, the planning, what used to be the planning commission, and now the IDA. So this project is moving along, but I just felt such a desire to look into the process as it has developed over the last several. It was first introduced at the end of 2022, as far as I can understand. And so I've gone back and really looked at what's the word? Not the schedule. Not the dates. It's like the order of dates. What's the word? I just want to preface, before I go into the actual meeting, I also just want to preface this by articulating that I, to a degree, feel like I understand, perhaps, why there was such an overwhelming, energetic consumption yesterday, looking into the history of this project. And it goes well beyond its current status. It goes well beyond the public response to the project. It goes well beyond the sort of surrounding neighborhood of where this project is being proposed. And it goes toward a vision that I've had for some time. And it's a vision that, when it sort of first started to emerge, I really didn't know consciously how to move in any direction that felt like it was moving in that direction. I didn't know what steps to take to move in that direction. As much as I wanted that direction to manifest, it wasn't consciously there enough for me to... It's interesting to me. I've said this in a prior video, but it's interesting to me how there has been some degree of a vision that I've had, and what seems to be manifesting within myself energetically and in sort of a physical sense is moving me in a direction, is moving me in that direction, is very correlated with the vision that has existed within myself, and there hasn't been an experience of forcing it. There hasn't been an experience of really strategizing, planning the steps necessary to manifest and actualize this perceived vision, this experience of an envisioned possibility that feels real to me within myself. And so it's so interesting to see how this process unfolding is creating almost that I was going to say staircase, but it's more so that pathway, those stepping stones moving in this direction, which really is a direction pointed at a moving target, although it feels really real and stationary. And so I just wanted to preface this by expressing the immense, intense desire that I felt yesterday in exploring the history of this project a little bit more, a little bit deeper, and seeing what arises. Okay, so here we go with the Troy City Council meeting of January 5th, 2023. This being, I believe, where this project was being introduced. Perhaps that's inaccurate, but that is my current understanding.
We do have Jeff from Rosenblum Corporation with us, Rosenblum Development, if anyone had questions. I guess my only one, Jeff, have you heard from any residents since that meeting and since you've talked to us in terms of concerns about the development?
I just want to interrupt really quick and say this is the same gentleman who was presenting at this past IDA meeting. I don't recall his full name, but his first name appears to be Jeff.
We haven't heard any new concerns, but we are continuing proactive outreach. And as I mentioned, we'll reconvene, we'll hold another neighborhood forum to share as we advance the conceptual design, which will reflect a lot of the comments that were collected.
That's awesome. Do you know approximate timing in terms of the neighborhood forum?
Grouping the latter part of February is probably the most likely, again, because we lose time with sort of the downtime over the holidays, so we're re-engaging now, trying to set up some, additional meetings. And I should mention, we also were able to hold a technical meeting with a number of the city departments to also collect feedback, any concerns, anything we should be aware of. So that also has been really productive, and appreciate all of the city departments that were represented for spending their time with us to kind of help guide us and give us feedback.
So it's really interesting to me because there had been a scheduled meeting in November of 2022, or was it? Yeah, the October meeting. If I said November, I don't know. Am I getting confused? So excuse me, I said November and I meant to say October. So there was a meeting between Rosenblum and some of the members of the community about this particular project. And what's interesting is there's this petition. I don't know if the petition is still ongoing, but it seems like there was a petition began in October 18th of 2022, But it's interesting because this petition goes on to say that there is a proposed box apartment building at the site of Citizens Bank on 5th between Broadway and Fulton that would clash with the Troy's Gilded Age character and place stress on the infrastructure of the downtown. We oppose this project in its current form. So it doesn't seem like this petition received the number of signatures it wanted to reach its goal. It's almost there. But it's just kind of interesting to see how community sentiment existed sort of near the sort of beginnings, if you will, of the life of this development. Currently at the April 19th, 2023 Planning Commission, what was at the time the Planning Commission, I believe that there's a bit more public input in this meeting. I think this is actually where I first heard of this project.
It fills the site. So materials, we're looking to try and complement the materials that are across the street. We're not going to be able to get the same, brownstone that is on those, but we're looking to, using color and texture, relate to those materials.
I do want to applaud you guys for getting out in front of the public engagement process and doing some of those interaction sessions. I think that's always beneficial and it's only going to serve you. I'll start with opening it up for public comment. We love this project. We think the Rosenblum team did a wonderful job reaching out to the neighborhood and responding to the comments.
One of the things I'm concerned about is losing my light.
I just want to see really quickly if the design changed from the initial January 5th meeting with the city council, if it changed at all in design. Yeah, it is okay. It was a slightly different design. So they did add a bit more character through information received by the local neighboring community there. You can definitely see more characters reminiscent of the older structures. They added the top, I forget what it's called, I don't know why cornice is coming through. They moved they have this larger central space that is also sort of reminiscent of their news apartments building. Yeah, in this initial proposal design, it looks like they did not have the front stoop entrance to the ground layer apartments, so that's another addition. And I suppose also these bay windows are also a newer addition to the design. They didn't really have bay windows in this construction, and also it looks like the coloring has changed to be a bit more cohesive with the neighboring, well, the buildings across the street, as well as the church that's right next door to it. It's unclear to me if the materials at this point are a sort of brick facade. It looks like there's some element of brick or brownstone looking material here. This upper section looks a little less clear, but it does kind of look like the color of brick. So it is kind of interesting to see how the informative process of working with the local community did shift to a great extent the design of this building.
And also, there's a huge tree in front of where they want to make this apartment building, and I'm hoping that will not be cut down. And I'm also concerned about the parking and the density. I just see 70 little tiny rabbit warrens in this building, and it concerns me. that it's just too many apartments for that amount of space, as well as there'll be parking issues, etc.
My name is Michael Flynn. I own 5 buildings across the street from this project, proposed project, and I think they've done a good job reaching out to the community, to the property owners. I did sign this petition, and I still would sign the petition to say that 70 units of the size that you're proposing is way too much. For this particular spot, I have 31 apartments across the street, comprises 5 buildings. There's enough people around. They don't need to put 2 people in little micro units. There will probably be over 100 people living in this. There's not 70 people, and they're not going to ride you can't make them ride the bus. You can't make them ride a bike. They're going to have a car.
I am extremely passionate about passive house development in our region. And, Troy's right for passive house development. This is the future of sustainable development. These are resilient buildings that will be around for 50 to 100 years. They will not be abandoned. They will not be put aside. The more of these that are built, the longer we will have sustainable infrastructure in our city. These will not be like other apartment buildings that the public has complained about that over years become not actively leased. These are the most comfortable buildings you can live in. And it's starting to catch on in the US. And we should encourage these developments so that developers see possibly the expediency and the generosity that the city has towards developers going this direction. Because I see a lot of projects in the time I've been here since 2007 as a student at RPI, the School of Architecture. I've only ever lived in Troy. I've lived up on the hill, I've lived downtown, and now I own a house on 592 3rd Ave in Lansingburg that I'm carefully restoring myself. And I can tell you that the value and passive house principles are there when you start renovating a house from the 1830s. So I've been waiting for one of these projects to come up to support in terms of the passive house principles, regardless of the developer who comes. I think this is a significant step forward and something to be really excited about. To my knowledge, I think this is the first project that's gotten to this stage in front of a planning commission in Troy. Again, I'm here to support passive and not necessarily a project in particular, but net zero and passive I think is extremely important. And I think it's a really big step forward that we see 2 projects presented tonight that fall into that category. And I think we should commend those developers and also listen to neighborhood concerns. I think that's paramount to our city. And the fact that they've held these meetings is important. But from day one, like I mentioned, this is just great news that we have people doing this, and we should push this stuff as quick as possible and as fast as possible because we need more people to do this. And we need models in order for that to happen.
So this checks a lot of boxes, but there's a lot of other boxes that it doesn't check. First thing is the number of units, 71 units. And I think this speaks to this idea that Rosenblum wants to restore what was there. This is not what was there. I would encourage Rosenblum to change the model and to stand behind what they're really saying, which is to add to the historic fabric of the city by recreating what was there. I think they're doing a lot to fit in with the fabric. One thing, when you talk about historic, you don't want to copy, right? You want to echo. A building needs to stand on its own. It needs to be, it's a new building, right? We're not trying, I don't think you want to build a new building that's trying to look old, right? I think you want something that will echo and respect fabric, but still be unto its own, if you will. And I think they're definitely heading in the right direction.
Getting into transportation is really interesting. Looking at transportation on a sort of metaphysical level is something that I really haven't delved into. It really isn't something that I've explored, with the exception of the one Reimagine 787 meeting I went to a while back. As I was sitting in that meeting, a question sort of came to me about traffic, because there was a lot of conversation in that project presentation around traffic and commentary about how certain traffic patterns were better than others. alleviated traffic perhaps more so than others. And one of the questions that came to me was sort of in the analogy of the human body and within the analogy of blood flow, and how I just got this imagery as I was sitting listening to the dialogue of blood cells moving through the veins and arteries, and I just got this image of the blood cells sort of congesting, there being this point of congestion. Yes, there is a perception of too much congestion, but that there is congestion seemed to me to be coming through as part of the process of what it is to have blood flow. And so the question sort of came through, and even in thinking about flow in general, the experience of flow, the experience of energetic flow, and how there are moments experienced perceptually as stuckness or as sort of a stagnancy, a staticness, and just the nature of static energy and the nature of staticness, of stagnancy. And not to say that stagnancy, staticness, congestion, if you will, is wrong. And I think this was part of what was coming through when I was sitting in that transportation meeting, and eventually I asked the question of what is too much traffic? What is considered as too much traffic? And what is considered as sort of appropriate, for lack of a better phrase, traffic? Because it often seems like the desire, at least theoretically, is to eradicate in its entirety traffic. And so it kind of resonates analogously to desiring to sort of eradicate staticness, to eradicate stagnancy and the experience of it perceptually, and just the sort of concept of it, if you will. And so it's just really interesting how, I don't remember what kind of started that, or what sort of sparked that flow. Talk about flow. But I guess it's just interesting to think about what aspects, if any at all, in these developments, in these newer constructions, what they're sort of metaphysically grounded in, what the consciousness giving rise to these developments is sort of rooted in, aiming at, grounded within, arising from. And so it often lends itself to what feels workable in a development and what doesn't. Not to say that that's necessarily so black and white, and not to necessarily say that it's always so mutually exclusive in the experience of it, in the context of it, the multidimensional sort of context and depth. That's one of the interesting things that really comes through in projects, and sort of in listening to any frustration and any excitement that is connected and correlated with developments. It's sort of tuning the ear, if you will, sort of deep listening to what it is that might be really speaking as frustration. Oftentimes, it's at least very possible that some of the frustration has nothing to do with the project. And perhaps some of the excitement has nothing to do with the project. But it's kind of just interesting when listening to sort of the, I suppose, emotionality, but the really listening to, in a deep sense, to what is speaking, and it's not necessarily what's appearing on the surface. Even though sort of we're ironically kind of talking about what is being proposed for the surface, on a surface level, there are deeper aspects here that are also speaking and perhaps inviting a sense of exploration into what that infrastructural metaphysical voice is saying. And there are some aspects of these developments that are speaking so much more loudly, and then there are some that are speaking a lot more subtly and maybe more challenging to really acutely hear. So it seems so straightforward on paper, and it seems so straightforward on the surface in terms of, does this meet certain requirements? Does this meet certain criteria? For some reason, I have been feeling relatively anxious, and it's interesting because it kind of feels like the energy I was feeling when I first began recording for these videos and with the intention of editing and uploading them to YouTube. And so I'm feeling a very sort of similar trepidation and hesitation and anxiety about it. It's also interesting because a lot of this energy sort of feels a little bit more like it's in the background than it is acutely present. I don't necessarily feel like it is prohibitive of continuing to explore information, and yet it's still subtly present within the experience, and I can feel it, and I'm just finding it very interesting. So I'm just noticing this energy, I'm acknowledging the energy. I've been acknowledging it really since yesterday, if not the day before, and still feeling it this morning, so I am in the acknowledgement, still intending to move forward. And I am actually a little bit curious what's going on astrologically. I know that as far as I can remember, there is a solar eclipse coming up soon. It's also interesting because I noticed that the heat in the body, it's almost as though it feels like my body heat is really, really high. It is on fire. And I know it's not correlated with having a fever. This happens to me quite often. I've been having a lot of dreams, and I feel, and my mental body has been very active over the last couple days. I have been going down so many different development rabbit holes into the sort of history of these developments since they were sort of first proposed, or at least as far back as I could find them, being first proposed to a governmental body. And I've been following them, and I watched all that I could find of any time that the applicants came in front of a governing body, whether it was the city council, the planning commission, which is now the planning board, but what was the planning commission at the time. I've looked into zoning board of appeals meetings, as well as the Troy IDA. And I just went really, really, really deep and started really tracking a lot of the developments, a lot of the unfoldment in a sort of timeline of events, if you will. But one of the things that kept coming up was the Troy Comprehensive Plan and the Troy zoning ordinance that was newly adopted in 2023. And this was probably the first time I can consciously recall becoming aware of the Troy zoning code at all. Now, I've watched zoning board of appeals meetings before, and I'm aware of zoning, and I've heard other committee meetings discuss a bit of zoning, but I never really felt an impetus to look into what this zoning ordinance was. And I feel similarly about the Troy Comprehensive Plan. There might have even been a previous video where I very briefly showcased the comprehensive plan, or somehow it came up in an exploration. But even at that time, I actually had kept a tab open of this comprehensive plan, intending to go back to it because I felt in myself like it was something that I did have an intention to return to, but over a span of several weeks, that just didn't really come to pass. And I, in that time frame, didn't really feel much of a pull to explore it until now. So yesterday I was sort of talking to myself and really expressing how I was feeling sort of at that moment where that sort of moment of digestion, and it felt a bit overwhelming in the moment, and I didn't really know consciously what direction to move in. And I say this not to say that I wasn't present and I wasn't grounded within a sort of sense of integrity within myself. It's just that within that experience, on a conscious level, I wasn't quite aware of what direction was calling out. So in that moment, I sort of let it go, and within 5 to 10 minutes, I sort of had this moment of inspired thought come through around the comprehensive plan, which had been mentioned several times in the meetings. And so when that thought came through, I felt encouraged. I have it here, the comprehensive plan. I also have the zoning ordinance saved. I know I brought up the zoning ordinance in a prior recording in this compiled video. I don't know that that's particularly calling out at this moment. The zoning ordinance and the Troy comprehensive plan are a bit distinct from one another. So the Troy comprehensive plan was adopted in 2018, whereas the zoning ordinance was adopted in 2023. Now, I have not really explored what led up to the enactment of the new zoning ordinance in 2023. That's also something that's piqued my interest quite a bit. But at this particular juncture, is it juncture or junction? I'm gonna focus on just the comprehensive plan and give it a good old, take a little bit of an adventure, go on a little bit of an adventure into the comprehensive plan to sort of maybe get a bit of a bigger picture view of what is sort of speaking through Troy here. What Troy is sort of speaking in terms of its comprehensive body, and its sort of vision and direction, and just see what comes of that. So I feel good about it. I feel excited, interwoven with a feeling of a bit of that anxiousness, that uncharted territory-ness. That's sort of what it feels like. Uncharted territory, not really sure what I'm getting into in sort of a egoic sense of self perspective. Not really sure what I'm doing, but continuing on nonetheless. Okay, so this comprehensive plan is 164 pages. So, investment. It's actually, I'm just going to quickly say that it's interesting because 2018 was a really, really, I don't know if auspicious is the right word, but it was a really impactful beginning for me, because that was when Uranus entered my sun sign of Taurus. I would say that during this Uranus transit, I experienced the most change in my life. And I say that in a sense of consolidated change, continuous change. But it's the nature of Uranus in its sort of, I suppose, spontaneity. It's spontaneous shifting. Dynamism is coming through. What am I trying to say? Dynamicness. But I feel like there's a word, dynamism or something. But it's that kind of electrifying dynamism, if I'm saying that correctly. I feel like it is. If it's not a word, then whatever, I'm just going to continue using it. But it's that kind of nature, that sort of disruptive, all of a sudden, everything sort of changes unexpectedly. Almost I'm getting this image of strobe lights, and it almost kind of feels like a little bit of a continuous flow of strobe lights, except they're erratic. And when they occur, that there is this sort of fundamental shift. And so anyway, I'm noticing this 2018 date, and it's just really interesting to me. I've actually looked into a potential Troy astrological birth chart, not using the date of its official founding, but using the date of the founding of its name as Troy. I wanted to look through the surface of Troy to really dive very deeply and spiritually into that energy that sort of gives rise to what appears on the surface as Troy. Whether in a physical sense, a sort of relational sense, and just a sort of overall big picture experience of it. And so all of that to sort of come back to this comprehensive plan. And so the intention here in reading through this comprehensive plan is really to observe and notice what sort of patterns are coming through in how Troy sort of perceives itself and its direction. And that's kind of the intention I've had looking into the developments as well. It's not always, immediate in observation. So Troy too, in sort of the perception of it being a body, has also been experiencing that transit. So it's just kind of interesting to think about Taurus, that sort of represents this groundedness in being, the physicality of life, of what it is to be, of what it is to do, and having that groundedness in one's sense of self in a sort of physical, in the sort of physicality, in the physicality, in the material nature of reality, and how Uranus transiting that aspect of life, Uranus being sort of representative of the rather spontaneous, erratic, electrifying ingenuity and sort of higher mindedness, because it relates to Aquarius, the sort of technological advancements. And it doesn't have to just be technological in a digital sense. The body itself is perceived as technology. And so it's sort of the technology and the relationship between advancements in technological processes and the relationship with that materiality and the physicality and the grounded beingness of life. Okay, so the camera card is full. I'm not really sure why I'm getting this message because I deleted a bunch of material off of the camera the camera card this morning, and I've only recorded about, give or take, maybe 20-ish so minutes. What I've recorded thus far is nowhere near what I understand the capacity of the card to be, and it's been giving me this message on and off for the last couple times that I've tried to use the camera for these particular recordings. So not really quite sure what's going on with that, but to sort of keep with the momentum, if you will, I'm just gonna use the camera in the computer, which I am still grateful to have available and accessible to me to continue with these recordings. So here we go, jumping into the comprehensive plan again. So I was just talking about the 2018, the nature of this comprehensive plan being enacted in 2018 and sort of the interesting correlation with the transit of Uranus through Taurus. And so it's kind of interesting to come into the exploration of this comprehensive plan with that in mind. Okay, so over a 2-year period, individuals and organizations in the city participated in interviews, workshops, open houses, and online surveys intended to capture ideas, goals, and recommendations for this plan. The City Summit, a 3-day citywide community visioning and brainstorming event, provided a strong foundation for the development of this document, and many ideas discussed at the summit, have been carried forward into the policies of this plan. It's interesting how the process unfolded in a 2+ year period, but this city summit was 3 days. That, to me, does not seem nearly adequate. A comprehensive plan is a well-considered document that helps guide a city's future evolution. The preparation of the Realize Troy Comprehensive Plan was initiated in 2014. So the preparation was initiated in 2014. There was a 2-year period of capturing ideas and goals and recommendations, and then a 3-day community event. The new plan establishes a vision, city building strategies, and describes and illustrates projects that can support the long-term transformation of the city. The process of creating this plan involved a 3-year dialogue with the broad community aimed at determining community goals and aspirations. I think the timeline on this is a little confused. Wow. This comprehensive plan provides a framework to guide new development and transformation in the city over the next 25 years and beyond. It's interesting because the last comprehensive plan was completed in 1962, and since its original adoption had not been formally updated or amended, throughout which period Troy had experienced significant change, resulting in the need to prepare an updated plan. So it's interesting how they're sort of still setting the stage for such a projection into the future for this comprehensive plan to apply to. And I'm curious how that sort of mentality, how that mentality really defined a lot of what priorities and ideas and goals and the overall vision became. It would have been interesting if the comprehensive plan wasn't projected for any specific period of time at all. I don't know, it just kind of feels like creating in oneself that sense of security and control. I don't necessarily mean control as in dipping your hands into the pie of 20 plus years from now, but more so control in a sense of, okay, now we can have some security that this is going to guide us for the next several decades. So that sense of security being sort of projected onto this plan, onto the city in terms of, okay, this is what we're expecting for the next, this is what we're expecting as guidance and instruction for the next couple decades, so we feel a sense of security in that. So it's almost a sort of projection of insecurity. It will be used by the city to guide land use decisions and to seek funding and support for key infrastructure and capital improvement projects. Neighborhood groups and nonprofits will use it to seek funding as well. It will also provide developers with an understanding of the city's development priorities by identifying and illustrating the scale and form of new development that may occur in designated reinvestment areas and in other areas throughout the city. The plan does not include detailed neighborhood plans. Rather, it provides high-level directions for neighborhood improvement that communities can use to enhance the attractiveness and vitality of their neighborhoods. As such, detailed neighborhood planning may be a consideration following adoption of this plan. To ensure individual parts are properly understood, the plan must be read as a whole. The illustrations are intended to guide the interpretation of the plan, whereas maps form part of the policy framework of the plan. Yeah, I mean, it just kind of feels a little bit imbalanced. 3 interrelated planning processes: the local waterfront redevelopment plan, a coherent development framework for Troy's waterfront, the city center strategy, a set of action strategies aimed at enhancing economic development in the downtown, and then the comprehensive plan, citywide policies and strategies for community prosperity with a focus on improving the city's waterfront, fostering a thriving city center, and strengthening the city's neighborhoods. It's interesting because the city center, the way that it's being proposed, is largely being framed as the economic driver. And oftentimes in the modern sort of United States culture, and this is not exclusive to the United States, but it's just because I live in the United States and it's the most privy to me, I can relate the most intimately to it, that economic growth and the focus on economic growth and the economy in a way almost feels very akin and analogous to focusing so narrowly on sort of just that left center of the brain, left brain hemisphere, logic, practicality, reason, and sort of in a bit more of a holistic sense of being, the more mental body. And that's not to say that any of those aspects of being are wrong, are bad. And it's not to say that they're right and good. It's just to say that it's all of that. it's all of that integrated together in a sort of more holistic picture, in a more holistic sense of oneself, and all of that together sort of speaking a bit of a different language than simply the sort of distinct language, if you will, of logic and reason and practicality, etc., etc. I just kind of feel like the growth of one's egoic sense of self over the last several generations, if not beyond that, has largely been attributed and correlated with the growth of a focus solely on that aspect of the mental bod, of its mental capacity, of its mental sort of functioning and processing. And so it's just kind of interesting going back to the expression around everything being a center point within the body as a whole. It goes beyond the economy as a center point. The economy is one of sort of infinite center points. And so I question and I'm curious and I wonder how this plan could develop a bit differently in perceiving every body, every person, every aspect of the landscape, every aspect of beingness, if you will, how all of that integrated as center points within the body so that there isn't this sort of hierarchical perception, that there isn't this bypassing almost is what it feels like, as sort of a secondary. Everything else is secondary to this. Everything else is secondary to the city center. Everything else is secondary to the local waterfront. Yeah, I remember reading about this almost probably a year ago at this point. The village of Lansingburg, which was once sort of a separate village from Troy, was annexed to Troy in 1900, and I remember reading how contentious that was. The people who were living in the village of Lansingburg at the time had not wanted to become a part of within the city limits of Troy, and that had been that argument, that battle, for lack of a better phrase, had been ongoing for decades. And it sort of seemed like the city of Troy at the time kept pushing and pushing and pushing for Lansingburg to become part of it. It is interesting. By the 1930s, steel production was in decline and clothing production began gradually moving to the south. As a result, the city's growth stalled and population began to fall. Following World War II, Troy experienced more rapid outmigration spurred by low-density residential development in the counties and the rise of large-format commercial uses which followed. This trend was generally fueled by the prevalence and affordability of automobiles, land development, and speculation, and the housing and shopping preferences of the population. Residents of the city were aspiring to own a house on a large lot in a quiet neighborhood, and the pattern of growth within the city and counties reflected this desire. As development spread to outlying areas, traffic congestion increased and a heavier reliance was placed on highways and major arterial roads to move people and goods. So it's just this continual sort of patterned process of contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion. And so it becomes even more interesting when the perception the perception of what appears to be happening feels so urgent in a need to address it, when perhaps it's just that sort of breathing out and it just feels more acute at this moment because of sort of the perceived personal relationship to it. When it's really that personal relationship and that is speaking the loudest, that sense of oneself intimately connected with the experience of the contraction or the expansion or both, there can be that experience of an urgency and a perceived need for that urgent nature to be addressed, when perhaps in sort of a bigger picture perception, it is sort of a more impersonal perception. It is all part of a process that is continuously unfolding in patterns and in emergence that can be sensed within oneself. And it's sensed within oneself in that sense of grounded in that sense of security within oneself and safety within oneself, and the resourcefulness within oneself. So in 1962, in an effort to address the city's shrinking population and the continued decline in manufacturing, the city of Troy developed its first comprehensive plan. So it almost feels like the first comprehensive plan emerged out of a perception of insecurity, perhaps a perception of fear. Okay, here it is, 1789. The town's name is changed from the village of Vanderhayden to Troy in order to celebrate American independence. Ingrained within the fabric of Troy, this perception of independence, and then sort of correlated with that is the perception of what it is to be independent, and sort of a question arising around the nature of independence and how that relates to the nature of dependence and the experience of dependence within the body of Troy. So the interplay of independence, dependence, and partnerships and unity, sort of integration perhaps. It's interesting how this comprehensive plan is just showing more and more how it's rooted in these perceptions of fear, insecurity, and that compounds on itself, and it compounds and it's projected out into the collective as though almost in that declarative utterance, in that way that makes it so. And so there are these patterns playing out again and again and again in sort of a cyclical nature. And really, it just kind of feels like the invitation is to address it. What is it within me that's seeing it that way? Because it doesn't have to necessarily be just that perception. And just that perception doesn't have to only be the perception that exists in a vacuum. It's so interesting to me. The Regional Alliance for the Creative Economy, a consortium of regional stakeholders, has also released new data on the potential of the capital region to generate significant economic activity from its impressive base of artists, journalists, writers, media producers, accomplished artisans, and handicrafters, performing arts, and heritage and cultural assets. Again, it's like the economy being the focal point. Almost again feeling like this economic machine, this economic generator, where those who are artists, journalists, writers, they're almost being portrayed, it almost feels like they're the cogs in the wheel that are fueling this economic machine, and it just feels a little bit like an exploitation, an extraction of value for the purpose of economic growth. To ensure the city of Troy is able to capture its share of regional population and job growth, the city must invest in its neighborhoods and community amenities, heritage assets, enhanced transportation options, affordable, diversified housing, and park spaces. There's sort of this narrative of, we need to do this because we need to retain a sense of ourselves as successful in the economy. And I just kind of feel like there is another perception available of, there is an invitation to explore investment into aspects of the city because it feels genuinely like it's the right thing to do, regardless of a perceived need to be successful in the economy. How resources within the body flow in that sort of oscillative, undulative sort of process, contractive, expansive, not to sort of create a standardized sense of oneself, but to explore the different aspects in a way that is excited. It's like economic growth is the byproduct of this focus on oneself and oneself being the individuals, the constituents, but also the body of Troy itself, focusing on what it has available to it now, where it is innately secure, where it is innately safe, where it is innately grateful, where it is innately patient and trusting. Focusing on those types of resources, that type of infrastructure, and that by nature engages and is inclusive of the whole community, because those resources are within everyone. Those resources are what are exchanged daily within oneself and with others. And they don't have to have anything to do with the flow of monetary resources. Okay, so I took a bit of a pause there. But now we're getting back into it. I'm not really quite clear who is included within this qualification, key stakeholders. I'm also not quite clear on why neighborhoods continues to be italicized. Only 43% of the total land base today is contributing to the tax base. Residential uses make up 32% of this total, and the remaining 11% includes commercial uses, the downtown core, and industrial and manufacturing uses. However, there are many opportunities for reinvestment, development, growth, and community revitalization in developed areas through intensification or infill. I'm not quite sure what is meant by intensification. I do believe infill is, for example, the 1818 project where the vacant bank sits, that proposed construction of a larger building within that sort of fills the space that of that plot, I believe is sort of what is referenced as infill. It infills that plot to sort of its like capacity, which is kind of interesting because it almost feels like, in looking at just a designated plot, to sort of fill that plot to its capacity almost feels like it has that plot running at full capacity at all times. Full capacity in terms of the particular, its relationship with the sort of artificially created, instituted zoning regulations. So the zoning regulations kind of creating the sort of containment field of a particular plot's capacity, and to infill it to that fullness of capacity, that fullness of its containment space, and running that at on full just feels like it's going to, it sort of burns out, it has this risk of burning out the whole system. There have often been, I've seen in many of the planning commission meetings, the applications for developments in front of the planning commission, that there is this argument made by the applicants that, or there is this dialogue around the rights, for lack of a better phrase, that applicants have to infill a plot to its full capacity based on the zoning regulations, to say basically, I have the ability and the right under the zoning regulations to build to this setback and to build to this floor level and to have this many units, etc., etc. And so there's this argument that, well, I have the capacity to build it up to this, and to not do so is compassion towards the residents, towards the neighborhood, towards the neighbors. So you can make all the recommendations you want and all the suggestions you want about reining in that right in our design, but ultimately we have the right to do it. And so in a lot of these projects, there is this sort of near full capacity developmental design of building infrastructure that is implemented in these spaces. And I just am wondering, in sort of the perception of that running at full capacity, an aspect of oneself, an aspect of self, if not even an aspect, just the self, the body, if you will, being that parcel, running at a full capacity. Now, full capacity is sort of, is that really the full capacity? Unclear, questionable. But I suppose maybe the question is coming through, or the question, perhaps the invitation is to sort of question, what is it to have a parcel sort of operate, if you will, at full capacity? What does that mean? And does that necessarily only apply to capacity in the sense of building development? Is community revitalization and growth and investment only correlated with building development, and I'm not saying that building development is, I'm not saying anything about building development other than perhaps there are other aspects of consideration here in sort of a bigger picture sense, a sort of more metaphysical sense that is being invited for exploration here, because the sense of burnout in the development of the city, because zoning regulations allow for it perhaps, feels a bit questionable and perhaps counterintuitive to the intentionality of the proposed intentionality of this comprehensive plan. Yeah. In order to protect neighborhoods, green spaces, and natural heritage features while also encouraging new development, areas where growth can be directed must be identified. This plan introduces a city structure that establishes a clear vision for development and intensification in the city. Still not quite sure what is meant by intensification. The other interesting thing is where growth can be directed must be identified. It almost, I mean, that to me kind of feels like a sort of lassoing in of containment spaces, where perhaps there's also an invitation here to sense into what feels right. And I know that that's rather abstract, but there's a sense that that's that resource, the resource of sensibility, if you will. Not necessarily identification, but sensing what there feels the most gravitation toward, where there feels the most where there is felt the most gravitation. And perhaps not necessarily laying it out in a hierarchical sense, but acknowledging aspects that are calling out for attention, that are calling out for focus, and really deeply listening to the sense of the sense within the self of what feels right. And that's where there's something interesting about representation and sort of how representation of information, touching on how representation of information, representation of a sense within oneself of what feels right, how that representation is often felt as lacking, for lack of a better phrase, in a singular sort of body. And I know that the governmental bodies are not necessarily singular in a vacuum. They are seemingly supportive of one another. And yet, to have a body of a few be representative of a collective sort of innate preference, going back to the innate preference. And I know that this ties a little bit into the democratic process, and this is some sort of another rabbit hole, but it sort of brings up the question of democracy and whether democracy in and of itself is even feeling workable. So setting that aside, I kind of question this direction of identification, and how direction of identification and sort of the strategic perception of aspects of a collective relationship to one another and within the body of the sort of collective sense, I just think there's an invitation for something totally different. And I'm not necessarily sure what that is, but the perception that this is based on of a sort of strategic identification with which energy is to be focused on in a hierarchical sense, in a projected ideal of what it is to economically be successful. It feels very narrowly focused and perhaps invitational of what the sum of the parts that already exist, the resources within that already exist, how perhaps there is a greater aspect, if you will, than the sort of sum of those parts. So I guess in a way there is an identification, but to a degree it's like an identification that is not the end of the story. It's not identification for the purposes of solving a problem. It's not identification necessarily in an absolutist sense for the solving of a problem, but perhaps identification to acknowledge the landscape in a more holistic bird's eye view, to then allow what wants to come through on a deeper level, in an extrasensory level, to come through and speak that which is greater than the sum of its parts. I think I'm gonna call a hiatus. I think I'm gonna put a pause on this. This is definitely something that I have every intention of coming back to. It perhaps may even be the beginning of the next video. I'm not really sure, but I have an intention to come back to this shortly. But for now, digest a lot of the information that's been consumed, if you will, over the last couple days, and just take a little bit of a step back to just in presence, in a grounded sense of presence, be silent. So on that note, we shall see.